We have on Pesach, on the Seder, we have two mitzvot. We have two separate mitzvot, one to eat matzah, and one, of course, we eat maror. But the Rambam brings out two characteristics of the mitzvah to eat the matzah and the mitzvah to eat the maror, which we can see it makes them very, very different. What are the two things? What is the thing that makes them so different? So the first is when you're eating matzah, if you swallow the matzah without first chewing, you're still yotze the mitzvah. You've still fulfilled the commandment that you have to eat matzah. However, the Rambam writes, but regarding maror, if you swallow the maror without first chewing it, you're not yotze the mitzvah. You haven't fulfilled your obligation to eat maror. So what's the difference? How can we understand the difference between the two different commandments? And they have two very, very different halachas. So Rabbi Nebenzahl, the chief rabbi of the old city of Yerushalayim, he asks the question and he says, why do we eat matzah? Why are we eating matzah? So we know it's because the bread didn't have time to rise, so therefore we have to eat, ultimately we have to eat bread that hasn't risen, which we call matzah. But really it's bread that didn't have time to rise, bread that didn't leaven, didn't turn into leaven. So therefore the matzah is defined more by what it's not than what it is. It's defined by the fact that it's not chametz. That's the ikka, that's the main characteristic of matzah. It doesn't really matter what the matzah tastes like. No one cares what the matzah tastes like. It's just the fact that it's not chametz. We compare that to the reason why we eat maror. What's the reason given for why we eat maror, the bitter herbs? Because in remembrance of the fact that the Egyptians, the Mitzrayim, embittered the lives of Bnei Yisrael. They embittered them. They harsh labor, very difficult conditions. So therefore, we eat something bitter. So when you eat it, you taste something very bitter. You think of bitterness, and that brings you to the thought to remember the embittered times of Bnei Yisrael. So with that in mind, we can understand the taste of the maror is the most important thing. So if you were to swallow maror without first chewing it, without first bringing out the taste of the herb, then you wouldn't be fulfilling the idea behind the mitzvah in the first place. So then that's big. Okay, it makes sense. But we can also ask one more question. We can ask another question. When we read in the Torah about Bnei Yisrael, when they were commanded to leave, it was time to leave Mitzrayim. We learn that they had to shecht the Korban Pesach and eat the Korban Pesach. They had to eat matzah, and they also had to eat maror. So if maror, the whole point of the maror is to chew the maror, to bring out the bitter taste, to remind us of the bitter times. Did they really need to be reminded of the bitter times while they were in Mitzrayim? They were there. Did they really need to be reminded of their terrible, terrible life in Egypt while they still lived there? Why were they commanded to eat the maror on that first Pesach itself? So this is discussed in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah tells us that in fact the slavery, the work that the Bnei Yisrael were involved in stopped in the Rosh Hashanah before they were freed at Pesach. So it's about 6 months. About 6 months before they were actually freed, before Yetziat Mitzrayim, was when they stopped working. So they did need a reminder, because they hadn't been immediately involved in slavery and hardship immediately preceding the Exodus, immediately preceding the Yetziat Mitzrayim. But even then, if that's the answer, 6 months, you tell someone who'd been living in slavery, for their family had been in slavery for 200 years, you think they're going to forget in 6 months what it was like? They still needed the reminder. So Rabbi Nebenzahl answers the question by saying, unfortunately, the truth is yes. Unfortunately, we do forget. Even things which are hard, even things which are terrible, when we go through a terrible, terrible tragedy, when suddenly faced with a new reality, especially a new extreme reality like slavery to freedom, it's very easy to forget and to move on, to look back with rose-tinted glasses. We all do it. When we look back at how things were. It's amazing how many times when we look back we forget the details about maybe some of the things that weren't so great. We think back to high school, or we think back to college. Oh, it was amazing, it was great, we did this, we did that. We forget maybe all the nights we were working, or the upset, the heartache that we may have gone through. And for sure, we hear this idea even more so the opposite way. When there's good times, and then suddenly we're faced by the opposite extreme, and we're faced with a more difficult time, we forget the good. We forget, maybe, what we went through in the good times, and now we're only stuck focusing on the bad. So we learn from the maror that memory is a very important tool, which we have to utilize, both for the good and also the bad. We have to remember the harder times, but not just for the sake of remembering, but in the same way that we eat the maror on Seder night as a vehicle for growth, as a vehicle to push us so that we can reach our potential. And ultimately that is one of the main goals of Seder, and that's something that we can bring out through the chewing, through the taste of the bitter herbs of the maror. I'd like to invite Rabbi Muskin now. We're going to switch on, trade on and off. I'd invite Rabbi Muskin now to share with you an idea.